Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2016 Sebald Lecture in Literary Translation. My name is Duncan Large, and I'm the Academic Director of the British Centre for Literary Translation. Together with the British Library, the BCLT is the host for this annual event, which began as the St. Jerome Lecture and was then renamed after his untimely death in 2001 in honour of acclaimed writer and critic W.G. Max Sebald. Max founded BCLT in 1989 at the University of East Anglia, Norwich, where he was based for over 30 years and latterly held the post of Professor of European Literature. After a quarter century promoting and celebrating the art of literary translation, in April last year, BCLT began an exciting new phase of its history in the form of a close partnership with Writers' Centre Norwich, to whom we are all very grateful for their sponsorship of this evening's event. For the Sebald Lecture each year, we invite a leading cultural figure to reflect on the art of literary translation from their personal viewpoint. It's my great pleasure and honour this evening to introduce to you the poet and broadcaster Roger McGough. Roger initially came to prominence in the 1960s in the Penguin anthology The Mersey Sound, which remains the biggest-selling British poetry book, and in the chart-topping group The Scaffold. Since then, he's published many internationally acclaimed collections of poems and stories for adults and children. He's twice won the Signal Poetry Award for Best Children's Poetry Book, first with Sky in the Pie in 1984, then again for Bad Bad Cats in 1999, the year in which he also won a Chumley Award. He received an OBE for services to poetry in 1997 and a CBE in 2004, the same year when he was elected Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. In addition to his numerous honorary degrees, he's an honorary Fellow of Liverpool John Moores University and honorary Professor at Thames Valley University. He was granted the Freedom of the City of Liverpool in 2001. Since his collected poems appeared in 2003 and his autobiography Said and Done in 2005, he's published 3 further collections for adults: That Awkward Age, 2009, As Far as I Know, 2012, and It Never Rains, 2015. His most recent collection for children, Poetry Pie, also 2015, it came out last October with illustrations by the author. In addition to his own prolific output as a poet, he's a tireless advocate for poetry more generally. He's edited several anthologies and succeeded Frank Delaney as presenter of the world's longest-running broadcast poetry programme, BBC Radio 4's Poetry Please. He's the author of a number of plays, and his film and television work has won him both a BAFTA Award and a Royal Television Society Award. Now, when it comes to translation, Roger has experience on both sides of the fence. Unsurprisingly, for a poet of such substance and versatility, his work has been translated into many other languages. In preparation for tonight's lecture, I tracked down collections and selections in a dozen other languages, but in conversation early on, I realized I'd missed a couple. They range from Catalan to Turkish, including translations into German by Max Sebald himself. Of particular relevance to tonight's lecture is the fact that Roger has also himself made 3 stunningly good adaptations of Molière plays for the English stage, all of which were premiered at the Liverpool Playhouse: Tartuffe in 2008, The Hypochondriac 2009, and The Misanthrope 2013. We're about to hear rather more about that whole experience. Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to join me in welcoming Roger McGough, who will give the 2016 Sebald Lecture with the title Molière et moi, on translating classic comedy.
Thank you very much. Very kind. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for coming. What I'd like to do this evening, if I may, is to read to you a lecture for about 35-40 minutes, and then there'll be time for a short question and answer session. And I better warn you that I do have some pretty tricky questions up my sleeve. So just better pay attention. Okay. I'd like to begin with a short poem entitled Another Brick in the Wall. Sure, it's like bashing your head against a brick wall, said Brother O'Shea, bashing my head against a brick wall. Brother O'Shea from County Clare taught me French, or rather failed to teach me French, at St Mary's College in Liverpool, where most of the staff were Irish Christian brothers. As well as a blackboard and a box of chalks, his principal teaching aid was the strap. The strap was about 12 inches long, 2 inches wide, and half an inch thick, and consisted of 4 lengths of black leather stitched together. It was rumoured that they were lovingly crafted by an order of nuns known as the Little Sisters of the Good Hiding. It is break time, and everybody is in the playground. You can tell which class is about to have a French lesson with Brother O'Shea. We are not the ones running round playing tick. We are not the ones heading the tennis ball. We are the ones huddled against the wall in the corner by the milk crates, pale-faced and shivering, eyes closed to heaven, lisping French declensions. O'Shea's teaching method was so simple and effective that to this day I don't know why his name isn't up there with all the great educationists, Piaget, Montessori, A.S. Neil. We are told in the previous lesson which 30 nouns we must learn by heart, paying particular attention to something called gender, or which 6 verbs we must decline in the future tense. Morning, boys. Morning, sir. Right, today we have animals. Close your books. Connor. Connor stands. Lappin. Rabbit, sir. Correct. Gilligan. Connor sits. Gilligan stands. Horse. Horse, sir. You idiot. Remain standing. Lynch. A burr, sir. Correct. Sit down. McGough. And so on. All around the class. Get the answer wrong and you remain standing. Get it wrong again and it's 2 whacks of the strap. Any hint of prompting your best friend and you get 6. Throughout the whole proceedings, he maintained a Bruce Forsyth kind of playfulness, prancing around in his soft Irish brogues, rarely losing his temper. Because the O'Shea method was simply the quickest way to get 35 young Scousers to learn a foreign language, or rather, to think they're learning a foreign language. Fast forward to Hull University, some weeks before a confused 20-year-old is due to sit his finals for a joint honours degree in French and geography. I'd almost given up on the latter. The late adolescent poetic musings and witty asides I worked into my essays on ocean currents and seismic plates had been cruelly ignored, whereas my imagination had been fired by the poems of Rimbaud, Verlaine and Baudelaire. And I look forward to letting my imagination loose on symbolism and existentialism in the coming exams. However, one afternoon, a keen young lecturer, new to the department, asked the group to read aloud from the Flaubert we were studying. When it was my turn, I gave a Gallic shrug to get me into the mood and dived in. After half a dozen lines, just as I was getting into the swing of things, he butted in, rather rudely, I thought, and asked to see me at the end of the period. It led me out of the building, into one of the forecourts, where nobody was about. He was breathing shallowly, and his face paled as I leaned towards me. He's going to kiss me, I thought. But no. McGough, how has the department arrived at a situation where you're about to sit for your final examination, which include a viva conducted in French, a language which you mangle and desecrate? You don't know, sir. You don't know. Didn't you spend the required term in France during your second year? My grandmother was ill, sir. Didn't you speak French at school? Well, it was like this. We had this Irish Christian brother called the prospect of an external examiner discovering a third-year language student who mumbled French in a Liverpool Irish accent might prove a costly embarrassment. So arrangements were made for my recently deceased grandmother to go ill again at the time of my viva. The cunning ploy worked, and there followed a degree, a job teaching catering French, some pop songs, poems, and unlikeliest of all, adaptations of 3 Molière plays. By 2007, there were at least 36 different translations of Tartuffe into English, so why the need for another? The answer lay with Gemma Bodinay, director of the Liverpool Playhouse, who wanted to celebrate the city's imminent status as capital of culture with a European play with a Liverpool heartbeat. Reading Tartuffe, it felt like Roger and Molière were a match made in heaven, she enthused. The wit, the scepticism, the joy of language that they both share felt just perfect. Of course, I was flattered by the invitation, but Molière, I didn't think so. Having skimmed through a handful of his plays as part of my course in schoolboy French, I couldn't imagine how his 17th century refined sensibilities would appeal to a contemporary audience. So I posted a couple of my own scripts for plays that had yet to see the light of stage and awaited her enthusiastic response. None was forthcoming. She would not be fobbed off. So when we met at the beginning of 2008, I promised to toy with Tartuffe while on a cruise from Southampton to Antigua. Now, I must mention something here to protect my street cred. I hadn't paid to go on a cruise. Please. No. In fact, I've been signed up by Saga as an entertainer, a sort of poet in captivity. With only 2 shows a week, I'd have plenty of time to think of excuses as to why I'd failed to unlock the key to this 350-year-old farce. Some excuses, of course, would be lame. Sorry, Gemma, I've twisted my knee, sprained my ankle, broke my metatarsal. Lame jokes there, sorry. Knowing that my French wasn't going to be good enough and that the job would take me more years than I had left, I didn't take Molière's original French texts with me. I would refer to them later. But a direct prose translation, Dover Press, an American edition of the 18th century version by Baker and Miller, plus adaptations in verse by the American poet Robert Wilbur, Ranjit Bolt, Christopher Hampton, as well as Liz Lockhead's wonderful Scottish conversion. Whether it was the salty air or the gentle rocking of the ship, I don't know. But once I'd given voice to Madame Pannell and her daughter-in-law, Elmire, in the opening scene, I was hooked. Madame Pannell. Philpot, where is that girl, Philpot? Fetch the bags. This place is driving one mad, Philpot. To stay another day, we will not. Elmire. But mother, why the unseemly haste? Because we feel disgraced. One is obviously in the way. One is bored. No one cares about one. One is ignored. Compared to this house, Bedlam's an oasis. A madhouse. That's what this place is. I love the energy of the writing and his ability to introduce most of the characters fully formed in the first few pages. Except Tartuffe, of course, who we don't meet until the 3rd act. Here is Damis, the son of Orgon, master of the house, and one of my favourite characters, the witty and wise maid Dorine, trying to reason with Madame Pannell. Damis. You're Monsieur Tartuffe, then. He can do no wrong? Certainly not. The man's a saint. We can't abide the way you paint him black. His character is beyond reproach. Oh, please, the man's a roach who scuttles about beneath our feet, a spider who spun a web of sanctimonious deceit. Dorine. We're not praying like a zealot to the skies. He watches us with beady eyes, breathes brimstone, a devil in disguise. Lorksy, calumny, what pharisaical behaviour. Can't you see? Tartuffe, why, he's our saviour. A saviour? Orgon's money is the only thing he saves. He's on the make. Why, see how he behaves. The man has no refinement. Just look at his clothes. And he speaks not in verse, but in leaden prose. I decided early on, or perhaps Damis decided for me, that Tartuffe, the impostor, and 2 plays later, Alceste, the misanthrope, would speak in prose rather than verse, marking them out as outsiders, nonconformists. There's a darker side to Tartuffe, and speaking in blank verse, he could be more lascivious, a step removed from his fellow characters. Back on dry land, 3 scenes written, and the commission accepted, I mulled over the original French text, compared it to what I was concocting, and convinced myself that the man himself would have approved. As an occasional playwright, I've always been more interested in language than in characterization, in imagery rather than plot. But faced with a Molière text, with the characters so clearly drawn, and the plot, though often creaking, still believable within the context of the world he had created, I was free to concentrate simply on rhyme. As a self-confessed non-linguist, I was less obsessed with the text and getting it right, and instead had a sense of joyous naivety that gave me a greater license to be playful. Suddenly, all those years spent writing poems in a lonely garret paid off. I do have a facility for rhyme, but it's a gift that has to be employed with care, as facetious rhymes can draw attention to themselves, upsetting the tone of the piece. With Molière's farces, I tried to construct a form wherein rhymes are occasionally signposted, flattering the audience who can guess what's coming, with a few googlies thrown in to catch them wrong-footed, often employing French words. Whenever I travel around the country to watch a production of Tartuffe, I could gauge very early on, Act 1, Scene 3, how well it would go down, by the audience reaction to the final couplet where Cléante chides his brother-in-law. You only had ears for Tartuffe, couldn't care less about Elmire, God's truth. What is it about this interloper that goads you into faux pas after faux pas? I'm glad you're laughing. If you hadn't laughed, I knew then, if they were with me on that one, they would have no problem with the jokey anachronisms in this exchange between Orgon, who was keen to wed his daughter, Marianne, to the impostor, Tartuffe. Marianne. Your feelings for him I just don't fathom. But that's your business, and clearly you have them. And if you choose to give him money, so what? In fact, he's welcome to mine, the lot. But please, not my body. Than be Tartuffed to that two-faced actor, I'd rather remain Virgo intacta. I will get me to a nunnery and remain there for life, rather poverty and silence than being his wife. Orgon. Oh, what sadistic games lovesick girls play, making parents suffer when they don't get their own way. Rejecting the lure of suicide, they make the first inquiry to enter the nearest convent, or if daddy's rich, the priory. which went down surprisingly well in Richmond. Talking about dropping in to catch one of the productions, in 2009, the Hypochondriac was playing at the, for a week, 3 weeks at the Yvonne Arnaud Theatre in Guildford. And it so happened that I was doing a gig during that week at the Electric Theatre, reading a poetry reading as part of the Guildford Literary Festival on the Saturday. So a friend of mine was taking me down, so I thought, what I'll do, I'll book tickets for the afternoon, get down there early, see the matinee of the Hypochondriac, and then go and do my show in the evening. So ET English Theatre Company arranged the tickets. So we both went there, arrived there nice and early in the afternoon, and the foyer was full. So I went to the girl at the desk and said, "I'll come to get tickets, please, for the show." And she said, "What the name?" I said, "Roger McGough." Roger McGough. And she said, "Sorry, no tickets for you, no tickets." I said, "It must be." She said, "Have a look." "Sorry, there's no tickets." I said, "But I'm the author." She said, I'm sorry. Here we are. Thank you. So I went went in to watch it. I was walking back and I said, excuse me, I want to take it to the Hypochondriac. This says 6 characters in search of an author. She said, Hypochondriac, that's next week. So I went in to see 6. And I always imagine, you know, the fun that the girl had. We had this nice Mr. Pirandello in on Saturday afternoon. A bit arrogant, but very good for his age. You know. Anyway, Moliere's verse plays are written entirely in Alexandrines, 12-syllable rhyming couplets, a form that Richard Wilbur, for one, has so skillfully reproduced. Wonderful, really did well. But whose endless thudding rhymes, I reckoned, would prove soporific to the modern ear. And not only to the modern ear. For here's a quotation from Alexander Pope. A limping Alexandrine ends the song, which like a wounded snake drags its slow length along. I wanted the audience to focus more on what the actor was saying rather than on the form in which it's being said. I was also extremely conscious of the assumption, even the expectation, that his work would sound like me. I didn't want any hint of irony. It was important that what I did reflected Molière. It was his story, and with a nod to his portrait on my desk, I would imagine him in the room with me and think that's how he would have done it. Pace is what I was after, and I sought to give each character a different voice, whether elegant, bombastic, or cheeky, by varying the line lengths, rhythm, and rhymes. And talking of bombastic, the most difficult characters the translator has to make believable are those who speak with the voice of reason. In Tartuffe, it is Cléante. The play was originally banned by Louis XIV for undermining the foundations of religion and denounced by the church as being the work of a demon in human flesh. And so, to mollify his critics and get the show back on the road, Molière entrusted his character, Cléante, some would say saddled him, with long speeches about hypocrisy and devotion, about belief and posturing. Some contemporary translators, I felt, found these chunks indigestible, and the results show. Molière's target, however, was not religion, but pretense and bigotry. And though hardly a God-fearing man, he was a regular churchgoer, like myself, in fact. So I set out to make Cléante a voice of reason, rather than an outdated fundamentalist. Here he is, trying to point out to his brother-in-law, Orgon, that Tartuffe is one of those people who use religion to get on in the world. I am the way, the truth, and the light, is what we're told. But for them, the road to heaven is paved with gold. Those same people drawn to where the cash is extol the virtues of sackcloth and ashes. Cunning in their employment of scripture divine, they shuffle and bend the words to undermine the true meaning, changing the colour of what we believe. A landscape of lies is the tapestry they weave. When they take up arms, they do so in his name. It's God's will, we fight for him, they claim, which makes them doubly dangerous. For who would oppose a seemingly just cause? The cancer grows. We see it spread across this kingdom and abroad. Vengeance dispatched with a consecrated sword. Chillingly prescient, don't you think? 12 months later, another saga cruise, another Molière adaptation. Or Magoffrier, as Gemma Bodinay was prone to call them. This time, she opted for Le Malade Imaginaire, or Le Maladie Imaginaire, as Brother O'Shea would have pronounced it. Written in 1673, this farce is tinged with real tragedy because, ironically, the writer collapsed on stage while performing it in front of Louis XIV. Something of a hypochondriac himself, Molière hated quacks with a vengeance. But vengeance was theirs when they refused to attend his sickbed and he died 2 days later. Should I allude to that coup de grace? We shall see. Can we happily do without the scene in which the self-obsessed Argan takes a stick to beat his youngest daughter? May we? Do I have to include the ballet sequences featuring a shepherdess, Pan and Punchinello? Nope. The translations and adaptations I took on board this time were by Martin Sorrell, Gerard Murphy, Robert Salvin, David Johnston, Alan Drury, and Richard Bean. None of whom I noticed, and I have an ear for this sort of thing, none of whom employed rhyme. Not an AABB in sight. The play opens with Argan, the hypochondriac, seated at his desk doing his accounts. And here's one faithful version of the original. 3 and 2 makes 5, and 5 makes 10, and 10 makes 20. 3 and 2 makes 5, that's 25 sol. Now, what have we here? The 24th. A minor insinuative and emollient enema to soften, moisten, and refresh Monsieur's bowels. What I like about Monsieur Fleurin, my apothecary, is that the bills are always so tactfully phrased. To soften, moisten, and refresh Monsieur's bowels. 1.5 sol. But Monsieur Fleurin, tact isn't everything. You mustn't fleece us invalids. On the aforementioned day, a good evacuative enema, prepared from mel rosatum diacatolican, honey, that's all honey, rhubarb, etc., as per prescription to flush, wash, and brush up Monsieur's lower abdomen, 3 sol. On the evening of the aforementioned day, a purgative and fortifying philtre of cinnamon and sennepods to expel and evacuate Monsieur's bile, followed by soporific and somniferous sedative to make Monsieur sleep, 4 sol. And so on for 4.5 pages. All good stuff, but short on humour and long on stools. So, confined to my cabin, as we crossed the Bay of Biscay, I wrote this. Enter Argan with an empty chamber pot, referring to which he cries out with an intensity worthy of Edith Piaf. Non, rien de rien. Je regrette rien. He sits at his desk to do his accounts. Now, where was I? Item of the 22nd, to lubricate bowel and make it fecund, to scour gut until clean as a whistle, with abrasive enema of nettle and thistle, administered with tube long and rubbery. 30 sols? 30 sols, that's daylight robbery. And so is this. Eardrops to clear nasal congestion, eye drops to eliminate dandruff and scurvy, and dropsy drops to prevent dropsy. That's topsy-turvy. And at 40 sols, mon Dieu, trop cher. As prescribed by Dr. Perjean, a soporific. Made from lettuce to make you sleep, in fact it did. But at a cost of 50 sols, well, that's horrific. In bed tonight, I'll not get a wink of sleep, counting the cost of your expensive sheep. Incidentally, you won't find the opening Edith Piaf lines in the Methuen publication, because that was thought of that during rehearsals, and they publish these things before it goes to press. Anyway, after a fortnight at sea, I returned home having had great fun with the crusty old Argan and the servant girl Toinette, and couldn't wait to compare my first few scenes with Molière's original French text. Of course, I made a remarkable discovery. Molière, the cheeky sod, had written his scathingly funny lampoon in prose. But I was far too immersed in the play now to go back. And besides, the verse was flowing. So with the author's permission, I carried on. Here, Argan explains to his brother Barald why he's slumped in a chair. Because I'm down in the dumps and the worse for wear. I've a boil on my backside, which is not amusing. It's burst its banks and the pus is oozing. My throat is burning, my ink fingers are itching. My eyes are dimming, my testicles twitching. My chin is double, my toes are twisted. My ankles have swollen, my elbows are blistered. My bladder's deflated, my hair's turning white. I sneeze through the day and I cough through the night. I am fast in decline and racked in pain. Apart from that, you're as right as rain. Excellent. I have to say, though, that as a result of using rhyme and this sort of heightened comic language, Argan comes over as more genial than in the original. And the merriment reduces the element of danger in his paternal tyranny. And the same could be said for Orgon in Tartuffe, possibly Alceste in Misanthrope. Also, I tried to rein in the toilet humour and restrict the poo gags, unlike some adaptations in which the gagging seems more reflex than funny. Following the success of Tartuffe and the Hypochondriac, the English touring theatre were keen on another co-production with the Liverpool Playhouse. So it was back to the drawing board in the French drawing room. I avoided Le Misanthrope because Martin Crimp's contemporary version, starring Keira Knightley and Damian Lewis, was pulling audiences in on the West End, and looked instead at Don Juan, The Miser, School for Wives, and Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme. But the engine wouldn't start. Then Gemma Bodinay pointed out that by the time our version of The Misanthrope, generally considered to be Molière's finest play, hit the boards, Damien and Keira would be gracing pastures new. And so it proved. Again, I picked up my quill and hoisted the tricolour. Unlike my previous Molières, with their witty servant girls, broad elements of farce, and highly implausible happy endings, this adaptation was never going to be straightforward. The action, what little there is, takes place in one room, a salon in the house of Célimène, the beautiful and coquettish young widow. But Célimène's gift is a witty bitchiness. Here, to the delight of her fawning coterie, she slags off 3 absent friends. Oh, Damon is your man for the tittle-tattle, the emperor of babble, the prince of prattle. I try to attend, I really do, to what he says, then my mind goes blank, my eyes do glaze. Why, he can make a whole career out of verbiage and logorrhea. Gerald, what a bore. Quite simply, what is the man for? Obsessed with rank and inordinately vain, he raises le snobisme to another plane. Conversing with servants he regards as a burden. If your blood's not blue, you won't get a word in. Belize, silly woman, what does she have for a brain? Have you tried conversation? The strain is unbearable. And the cause is, you provide the words and she, the pauses. I try as far as I'm able to find a topic we can discuss. What ladies are wearing the most fashionable gown, who's the handsomest man in town, who's in favour, who's in disgrace. She nods and stirs far off into space. Belize, ill at ease in a world of her own, as silence descends like a puzzled stone. As well as the original French text, I referred to a prose version, another Dover publication, this one by Henri Enlone, first published in 1876. Good old Richard Wilbur, and 3 contemporary adaptations by Martin Crimp, Tony Harrison, and Liz Lockett. A scene that troubled me early on came in Act 1, Scene 2, in fact, when Alceste, a man admired in Paris for his poetry, despite his scorn for society, its pretentiousness and vanity, is visited by a foppish Orante, whose cliched love lyric to Phyllis is torn apart by our hero. To emphasize the point, he recites a poem, not his own, which he considers superior to the florid pomp and tinsel fashionable in the literary salons of the day. All good stuff and commendable, except for the poem, which to modern ears might well have been dashed off by Arante. Had our great monarch offered me Paris, his city large and fair, and in return must forfeit the love of my true dear, then I would say, King Hal, I pray, take back your Paris fair. I would rather keep my own true love. I love much more my dear. Unlike Molière, I didn't need to flatter His Majesty, so I wondered which poem Alceste himself might have chosen, and gave him these lines. You are familiar, I assume, with the work of François Villon, a wonderful writer, but not one you care to get into a fight with. The vagabond poet, a troubadour who'd slit your throat for a piece of silver. But what verse he wrote. Pray, Arante, remove the cloth from your ears and listen to the Ballad of the Hanged Men, a poem written days before he was hanged alongside 5 of his gang. Here is part of it. Brothers who look upon our plight, Let not your hearts harden at the sight, but pray God grant us pardon. Look on us six that are hanging thus, and do not mock, but pity us. The flesh you see now hideous and destroyed, we once worshipped and enjoyed. The rain from heaven has washed us clean. The sun has scorched us black and bare. Crows and ravens have pecked out our eyes, feathered their nests with our beards and hair. Never a moment our bodies are still, tossed this way and that at the will of the wind. Live not as we who feeble be, but pray to God, for we have sinned. Our aunt, of course, is scandalized, if not a little jealous. The fellow is a sinner, the lowest of the low. How come his poems are published? With whom was he in the know? Alceste goads him further. In other words, if I understand what you're saying, only fine, God-fearing men of class and breeding should be allowed to put pen to paper. Our aunt, voicing an opinion firmly held by many a poet and critic today, replies, pas du tout. But the writing of verse is a difficult art, and the unwashed should be discouraged from the start. By interpreting his work as an adapter with a contemporary audience in mind, rather than as a translator with concerns for history as well as language, I sought to do justice to the son of the royal upholsterer, Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, so that on leaving the theatre, the audience doesn't think it spent 2 hours in the company of a group of actors dressed in period costume, but in a 17th century salon in Paris, where elitism, snobbery and deceit were as rife as they are in Britain today. I'd just like to, before the Q&A, I'd like to thank a former student of Dr. Lodge, Robert Stock, whose MA thesis comparing my work to Richard Wilbur, I found very useful indeed, and to Dr. Lodge for really inviting me today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Roger. That was wonderful. And I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. We do have time now to take a number of questions, and Roger's kindly agreed to a Q&A.
And if they're difficult ones, I hand them over to Dr. Lodge.
Sorry.
So.
I wonder if I could perhaps start off by picking up on a distinction you made right at the end of your lecture, when you describe yourself as an adapter rather than as a translator. And I wonder if you could say a little more about what that distinction means for you.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, as I say, when first asked to do it, my French isn't good enough. I'm not a linguist. My French is not good enough. I mean, but that didn't put me off doing it, because I thought what I want to do is to make the Molière plays come to life in a way for me, because sometimes some of the translations I read didn't spark me off, really, in a sense. Didn't, and I suppose I was looking for something contemporary, to be honest with you. But what I found, the whole thing was exciting, because one of them, I think it was the Hypochondriac, I didn't read the whole play first. I didn't read it all, then go back to it and start it. And I didn't know what was happening until I got to the end. It sounds crazy, but it was exciting to find out what happened in the next scene as you're going through it. I mean, it sounds curious in this sense. I didn't want not to do it because I wasn't a linguist. When asked to do Molière, my first thought was, my language isn't good enough, my skills aren't good enough. But I have other skills, rhyme, as I say, and a sense of what will work with an audience, I imagine. And so that gave me the courage. See, had I been asked to do it 20 years ago, I'd have said no, I'd have said not good enough. But it comes with age, a sense of, not only arrogance, but a sense of, I'll have a go, it doesn't matter, in a way. I had the courage to do it on the skills I have, but not other skills. I mean, but looking at Richard Wilbur, it is beautiful poetry he's created out of Molière, and he came to it in a very different sort of way, because he you want to be very faithful to the written word and to do justice to what Molière had said and the Alexandrians and that sort of thing. And I didn't. I was much more free with it. And you lose some, swings and roundabouts in a sense.
But you mentioned that you were working with the French originals, though, as well.
Yes.
How did you find yourself going back?
And all the time. I had to do that.
Yeah.
I had to do that. I mean, why the English adaptations helped me. I started with the prose translation. That gives you the story and what's happening next, who's going to speak. And sometimes I'd look at the English adaptations, get ideas. For the storyline, not for rhyme, not for language, but moving the story sometimes. Because looking at even the English prose wasn't sometimes clear. Then that will clarify the French for me. Because if I'd started with Molière, my French is good enough to read it right the way through the words, and I kept going to the dictionary all the time. So I would then just go back to the French to look at justify what I was doing. Have I gone too far from what he's doing? And Molière, and, respect for because that was the word, and I didn't want to take too much liberties, but without his permission.
Did you find that your technique was changing with each new adaptation?
It's interesting, Duncan. As I was fairly surprisingly quick. In fact, when we first did. I was asked to do the Tartuffe and Gemma Bodnet were in rehearsal, so people are going to ask you how long did it take you to do it. Don't tell them. Because they think and it's not true, because they just once you do it, just do it. You've gone into it, and the thing comes, and the verses come, and it wrote itself, in a sense. I had to go back to it, of course, but you're writing. You got a time limit to do it. It's going to be an actor's going to be doing it, and but I always gave them pretty well full formed. They were never changed, except for that little bit in front of the Hypochondriac. They existed as delivery, as the final thing.
Thank you. Yes.
Can I ask you? Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you.
It should be.
Okay. Can I ask you if you were ever tempted by Racine or Corneille, or was it really the comic aspects of Molière that you wanted to bring to a modern audience?
Yes, I suppose I remember doing both at Corneille and Racine. Again at university quite enjoyed, and Molière was always the sort of we didn't take him. He wasn't taken seriously as much by Monsieur Genestier at Hull. And they were the top men. He was the sort of the comedy element to it. But I wasn't offered it. I was offered Molière, and with good reason, I think, in retrospect. Because I don't know whether I could have taken those liberties I did take with Racine and Montcornet. I don't know. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for this great presentation. I've been looking forward to it for a long time, to be honest. I was just wondering, on the cruise, you took a few translations with you, Ranjit Bolt, Hampton, Lockett, and Wilbur. And I was just wondering which Bolt you took. Was it the one published in 1991 or the one published in 2002? Because they were different. Here, Bolt republished his earlier translation in in eight syllable lines. And the first one was in just standard heroic couplets. Just this question, and then
why did he?
Because he wanted the rhymes to be even more conspicuous in his second publication.
Okay.
And because as the lines were shorter, the rhymes were recurring more frequently.
Interesting.
And actually, I think that there is an evolution of the conspicuousness of rhyme in Molière translations from the 1950s to present times. You have Wilbur, which is the rhyming schemes are very soft, very delicate, and then you have Frame, which is quite playful but a bit reserved, and then you have Bolt, which is very funny and overtly funny, and then you have you, where the rhymes are extremely conspicuous. And you said that the form shouldn't take too much presence, and you wanted the audience to be aware of what the actors are saying rather than how they are saying it. But I was wondering that in the Misanthrope, rhymes the rhymes are not just conventional and artificial medium. They are a dramatic, a real dramatic object, because the characters are commenting on them. Because you've got Alceste refusing to speak in rhymes, saying from henceforth no rhymes, no iambics, no everything. So I was just wondering, were you aware that when writing these translations, you were inscribed in a continuity, in an evolution from rhyme as just something very subtle to something extremely painful and conspicuous?
I was never too aware of it in a sense, and I was certainly not aware of the history of it, of translation. And if I did have a Ranger Bolt, which I enjoyed, I don't know which one it was, and very different. And looking at the Wilbur and him and so on, and of course people like later on the Tony Harrison, of course, as you know, set in Paris,
Yes.
Charles de Gaulle,
Yes.
Liz Lockhead, very contemporary, and Martin Crimp, very funny, useful again for storytelling and getting the story going. But as far as the language is going, and I decided, again, as I say with Tartuffe and Alceste, they would abhor, they would not. It's a funny conceit, isn't it, that French audiences went to the play and everybody spoke in verse, and this is to be expected. It wasn't to them unusual. People come and start rhyming. That's what people did in the theatre. And our audiences today here, we don't have that. So people go to the audience and suddenly come on, everyone's speaking rhyme. Why are they doing this? And the people themselves, the educated people spoke in beautiful rhyme, and the servant girls are more, obviously, in scullery, sort of downstairs, they have their own way of doing it, very wise and witty, but a different sort of language they'd use and different sort of rhymes. And I like all that. How do you make those sort of differences work? But it was like intuitive, I think. Had to be intuitive. I think all the best answer when I go home. In bed tonight, I'll wake up and watch. Oh, what is that? That's it. I suppose it is intuitive and with some experience of doing it. Sorry, I can't be more. Good questions, though. I mean, I like to talk. You tell me.
If I understood you rightly, you looked at other plays like Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, and you felt you couldn't translate them. Why?
I don't know. It's funny enough, isn't it? I tried with Bourgeois Gentilhomme, and what's the one where the lovers, and he gets the ladder outside and goes into her bedroom, and that one. Anyway, I don't know why. I probably, if I'd have stayed with it longer, I probably could have made it work. They sounded a bit too closer to the ones I'd just done. Maybe I'd just done the Tartuffe and the Hypochondriac. And Misanthrope seemed the more difficult to do because there wasn't seeming much happening. There was less farce in there, wasn't there? No people indoors and under tables and that sort of thing. And that was more difficult. And also, again, other thing about, I mentioned in the Hypochondriac, and I mentioned that he died, not long after he'd played Argan. And we did a version, rehearsals, and whereas he died on stage, we did it in the 2 previews before opening night, where actually he's on stage and dies, and the last scene is him in his chair, and all the cast come on with with candles and sing a song about Monsieur Molière. It's quite sad and quite moving at the end of it, but the cast really felt that it was very hard for them after all the going and the comedy. They wanted to finish on a big ending, and they found it very difficult to really close in, even though it was quite sort of moving, quite liked it. But so we ditched that. But, yes. Oh, sorry. Oh.
I think that's a question.
Hello. I wanted to ask whether you'd been translated into French and whether you'd read those translations and if that was a pleasurable experience for you.
Do you know what? I'm quite angry about this. I'm quite angry about it, because as it's the only language I can sort of veer toward as it runs before it runs away. I've been translated into a lot of languages, German, Spanish, bits, and lots of languages, never knowing in French. And so I would love to be able to say, well, yes, I prefer the to the Norris. And I can't. Don't know why. I mean, when I first started writing poems myself at university, when I was 16, 17, I used to write sort of French. I was writing in French, little love poems, bad French, schoolboy French, but that was it. Je m'en vais au vent mauvais, comme porte ça, I just love that. I wanted to do that, but so I'm waiting.
I asked you before about using the French originals, but I mean, we've been discussing already the other versions, English versions, yes. And from your lecture, at times you were presenting it as if you had a range in front of you and you were cutting and pasting, but of course, what emerges is something so different from that, and so with such an integrity of its own. And I wonder if you could say a little more about your use of the other English versions as well, because clearly there comes a point where you put them aside.
Yeah, it's interesting, because when I first got all these versions, you get all these English versions in front of you. Think what you could do, you could cherry pick. You could cherry pick, couldn't you? Start off with the first verse and look at a bit of Crimp here, a bit of Liz Lockett here, a bit of that there, and that's good. That's a good couplet. I'll use that couplet, because you can't do that, because it doesn't fit together as a jigsaw, and it's got to get it's your own voice that does it. And once you get your own voice going, it just takes over. It's interesting, because I thought that might be a problem. As well as you won't do it, you couldn't do it anyway, because it would be illegal and plagiaristic, but you wouldn't do it, and you can't do it. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's interesting, because once I start doing it, and Madame Pinel and all these people start talking, they became the characters, I became them, they became me, and you become the actor, and I like doing voices and that sort of thing, you just mimic them. And then you'd look for the English, and I did one of these things too in slightly odd things in the first play. You're aware that remind the audience that they are in France, so I'd use little proverbs. So Madame Pinel would say, the English have a saying, the one who laughs at the end will last for the longest time, which roughly translated means, or later on someone was all that sort of, the English have a saying, there can be no smoke that's burning, which roughly translated means, and this is so a gag which kept coming in to remind the audience they are watching French people, that sort of thing, and French people playing the know-all, and that sort of thing. Getting it wrong. It's rather cruel. That was the answer if anyone asked the question to that one.
Because your versions delight in playing the French and the English off against each other.
Yes, I know. Is that all? I mean, I'm worried about that too. I mean, we're of purists. Are there any purists? I should have asked that at the very beginning, shouldn't I? So, that's sort of dangerous. It's a line, though, isn't it? It's a dangerous line in a sense, because if you're wanting Molière to be, I suppose if you want that clarity in Molière, you have there's Wilbur and there's other people, isn't it? I think I was always aware of an audience, of a modern audience, and the people who would go and enjoy it, and I wanted people like myself or young me, to go to Molière and enjoy Molière as I think I was deprived. No, before I came along. I think I would have missed out on Molière.
Because you deliberately include anachronisms and updating
Yes.
and so on as well.
Yes,
So-
yes, yeah.
Really following on from some of the things you've just said about the way in which you adapted, aren't you just writing? Do you feel as though you engage a different part of your brain when you're translating? Is it just like writing your own poetry? Or is it really, as we keep teaching literary translation in universities now, another branch of creative writing? I personally certainly do not feel that when I'm translating, I'm doing anything very different to when I'm writing. But then I have no imagination, so I just write non-fiction books. I'm interested in what the process is for you.
Say, for instance, that the speech of Cléante and about the way of the truth and the light and that sort of. Now, so you start off with what he's saying, and I became like a creative writing poem. But I was always pulled back to him, because Molière would say about the tapestry. There's a tapestry and and the sword, and I was using a lot of his language and even the phrases, but making it creative, being creative with it. But it's not like ordinary, like writing a poem, because writing a poem you go from different stages. If I start to write a poem, I'd never know where it's going to go. That's the point about most of my poems. That's the excitement, isn't it? You start writing something.
The Misanthrope, you never read it through, so you didn't know where it was going to go either.
With
the Misanthrope.
Oh yeah,
you didn't read it to the end before you start. I mean, quite often translators don't read to the end of the book.
Speech. I'm talking about each little speech. I mean, them taking. I mean, I've been translating each scene per scene. So I'll be looking at a scene. So if I come along as a poem, a speech, I start that. That's the poem. But if I was not writing translation, I'd start with a line, and then I wouldn't know what was going to happen at the end of the poem. Where here's, I've got to get back to the writer. It's Molière's speech. It's Molière's poem. I've got to make that. It's like a writing workshop, if you like.
But you're still harnessing your sort of creative imagination.
Well, got to, yeah, certainly. It's a marriage, isn't it, of the two?
Yeah,
ideally.
I think it's a fascinating one. I find it very little different to doing the research for, say, writing a biography than to do the research for writing a translation. Okay. There is other material out there, but it's still you that's the brain that's putting the English words on the page.
Indeed, yeah. Cheers.
You've made a few references to working with the actors or to things that happened in rehearsal, and I wondered if you maybe could say a little bit more about what that was like, whether you were involved with rehearsals for all the productions, whether you got to see actors trying on your words and trying their interpretations of them.
It was fascinating, very much a lovely part of the job. When you turned up on the first day, with the actors that had been, I didn't choose the actors, Gemma did that, and they were cast and all there. And they sit around, they all read the script, and it's the first time I've heard it read aloud. Imagine it, well, first time you heard it, so they sit around, they read it, and they were very favourable. It was lovely, it was wonderful. But they would have problems with pronunciations. And as a Liverpudlian, I'd rhyme some of my rhymes. I had great problems with some of them. I've forgotten what they are. But I say path and math and gath and gaff, laugh. And there was some. They would have problems with. They would always say laugh. They couldn't rhyme and laugh. I'd say it's path and laugh. And it's obvious, isn't it? And they wouldn't. There are other problems. Other people like Colin Tierney, there are a lot of actors who are typically good actors who would really worry about the language and the pace. But they read it beautifully. They came to it, and they just were sometimes not clear about quite what it meant or something like that. But that was great fun. I'm doing that. So I wish I should have written all these little. I should have made notes. I did make notes in rehearsals about what happened during the day, but I should have brought them because some interesting things there. but not for you. I'm afraid. Sorry.
Yes.
So, hello. Don't feel you have to ask questions, by the way. Don't feel, except not for you, please.
I've seen lots of Molière translations. I don't think I've ever seen one of yours. Where should I have seen them, apart from Liverpool and Guildford? And where can I see them?
Good.
Or when can I read them, indeed?
Oh, yeah. Well, there are copies of the Method things here, I think. We got copies of each one of them. It went on tour with each one, English touring company, toured around the country, you know, Brighton, Bath, Cambridge, Norfolk, all, you know, all the big, many of the big theatres, 3 years on the run, and quite happily. But now it's, and I don't know who, you're always hoping someone else is going to do it. Another theatre will pick it up and go on.
But there are lots of others. A crowd. I saw Ken Stott in Le Misanthrope at the Young Vic. I don't think that was yours, was it? I think
No.
it may have been Ranjit.
No, no. Yeah, but yeah. No, it's there are fortunes to be made.
Can I ask how much you were writing for Liverpool, though? And they were premiered in Liverpool.
They were premiered
as you were saying,
Liverpool,
there were some aspects of your writing which really needed that location in some ways.
I don't think so. No, I didn't. I wasn't aware of that. I know it was a Liverpool audience, but I was also aware that I was writing for myself, really, and there are no Liverpool references in it, so I don't think there's any Liverpool jokes. Oh, at the end of, we had a song at the end of Hypochondriac, where he refers to most efficacious in every way. This divides the audience here. There's some young people in the audience. Let me explain. There's some young people in the audience who've never heard of the scaffold. And the scaffold, we were a rock group, a famous group in the 60s, a cross between Oasis and Blur. And we had a song called Lily the Pink, Most Efficacious. And at the end of this, somebody refers to it, and people of a certain age would respond. But otherwise, that's a Liverpool reference. No, generally it wasn't that way.
Yes, we have a question at the front here.
Oh, that was Henry.
No, the last thing you were talking about makes me ask, I mean, when you were personifying Villon, were you thinking of him as a Scouser?
I never thought of that. No, I wasn't. It was interesting, wasn't it? Because Villon was... Because when I first thought of... Because that poem that I read, the one about the Paris, and it was in all the translations, it really is not very moving, and I thought, well, it doesn't do anything. And then I loved Villon when I was at uni, and I thought, I bet when I look him up, he was after, you know, Molière, of course, he wasn't, you know, so it could have happened, Alceste would have read Villon and referred to him. But now I like that, and it worked very well in the theatre too. It just changed the tone of everything that cuts through it, I thought.
Antonia?
No doubt your old school is still teaching French. Have you been back there, and have they yet put on a school production of one of your translations of Molière?
I have been back years ago. It's all changed. All the Irish Christian Brothers are no longer there. It's now a mixed school, boys and girls, and all the better for it. But,
what would the ghost of Father O'Shea say?
Brother O'Shea. Well, even God's sake. I suppose I'm very proud of me. He probably is all due to him. All my success will be down to him. I think.
And behind.
Thank you. Hello. I spent a couple of hours this afternoon sitting in the Strangers' Gallery of the House of Commons listening to the European debate, and so perhaps unsurprisingly I actually fell asleep during your talk. I do apologise. It's very rude.
It's very good.
I'm sorry. Is there any part of your presentation that you particularly would like to highlight, and just for the benefit of myself and anybody else who perhaps was? Thank you.
Sure, you mean as well.
Perhaps I might use this opportunity to mention that the lecture has been videoed this evening, and it will be available online in due course. Roger, I wonder if I could ask you about any influence that your work on Molière might have had on your other activities and your own poetry. Do you think there has been consciously any, or
nothing's that's particularly come out of it? I mean, it's a thought. You might go to what I've written and say, does this spark off another idea, and take it from there? It hasn't sort of happened. It seemed to be compartmentalised, but it was certainly a great thing to have done. I mean, as far as like loosening up and weighing words and as an exercise, if nothing else, it was great to do. But I don't think it has. Except always made me want to write a play again. I'd like to write a play, but I don't think I will.
Yes.
This is slightly sort of off the point, but I'd like to know your opinion of something. I was very interested when you said that the actors, I forget which play it is, they were meant to come on with candles after Molière had died. They felt that they couldn't do it, it wasn't appropriate. Now, I was slightly disturbed when I found that the Globe believed, from research they had done, that at the end of every Shakespearean play there would be a jig. And I found this so weird, the idea that at the end of King Lear, or the end of Hamlet, go bid the soldiers shoot, and then the actors all get up and do a dance. And I don't know if, obviously they are scholars and I'm not. I found it disturbing, so I just want to know, what do you think of the idea? Obviously you were happy that they didn't come on with candles at the death of Molière. What do you think of that idea of...
It does seem unusual, doesn't it? In a sense, you want people to go out with what they've been left with, in a sense, don't you? Was that was custom, or the Globe?
They said it was.
Yeah.
The first, I think, under Mark Rylance, the first, few years of the Globe, they always did this jig after whatever play they'd done.
Well, it just seems very strange to me. But in a sense, imagine after comedy, and that's what you want. It's like the end of the final song, and all go out happy. I bet Shakespeare didn't join in the jig. Do you think? Can't see it. No.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions. In addition to the video, I might add that Roger has kindly agreed to let the lecture be published in other words, the Journal of the Translators Association. So that will be, I think, in the next issue. Two things happen next. The bar will be open. And Roger has kindly agreed to have a book signing. So as he mentioned earlier, there are copies of all three of his Molière translations and some collections of his poetry, also outside and available for purchase, and Roger has kindly agreed to sign them. So It only remains for me to thank Roger once again for a wonderful lecture and for a wonderfully rich question and answer session. Can I thank once again the British Library for hosting us here, and thank you for coming, and can we thank Roger once again?
Thank you.